I fought for God. Who do you fight for, Exile?
Hello and welcome to another Path of Exile build guide. If you dream of commanding a small army of minions whose sole purpose is to do your bidding and outdo each other in killing monsters, then you've come to the right place. Sit back, relax and let the minions do all the work while you pick up loot and admire the scenery. While usually summoner builds are known to be rather complicated, Clooney's Zombiemancer is one of the easiest to play and at the same time boasting excellent DPS and survivability. Here's the high level breakdown of the build's capabilities. One of the most powerful summoner builds of any kind out there. Once you have the 7 empowered zombies out, they will obliterate everything in their path. They are equally effective at quickly clearing large packs of mobs, as well as killing bosses all the way up to Uber Elder. Your minions are incredibly resilient, being able to face tank pretty much everything thrown at them. They have very large health pools, capped resistances and huge amounts of life regen, so even in the toughest fights it will be enough to pull them back for a second or two in case they are in grave danger. The build is designed to be very easy to play without having to cast specific sequences of spells or combos that are generally the staple of summoner builds. After summoning your small army, pretty much everything after that is automated. While it requires a few mandatory uniques, they're all common ones which are really cheap even in the first days of a new league. As such, it's a more than decent starter build which can be easily funded as you progress through the game. Endgame min-maxing and best in slot items with very high affix rolls will be expensive, but I did manage to kill the Shaper with a 5 link and all my gear costing less than 2 exalts in total. With proper investment and a bit of practice, you will be able to clear all the content in the game. However, there are 2 map modes that you should avoid as they will cripple the build too much. Physical damage reflect will kill your zombies quick, and no mana regen makes it impossible for you to cast anything as your mana pool is very small. This being said, let's see how you go about getting all that. The guide is divided into 7 main sections: Build Overview, Passive Tree and Leveling, Ascendancy, Pantheon, Gems and Links, Gear, Flasks and Jewels, and finally Pros and Cons. In the video description below you will find a link for importing the entire build guide in the Path of Building tool. It includes the passive tree broken down into level brackets, example gear, and a detailed notes section on gearing, stats priorities and gems. With that out of the way, it is time to lay out the build overview. The build revolves around summoning zombie minions and then using specific pieces of gear, auras and other minions to greatly buff them. Zombies are a permanent type of minion, meaning they do not expire nor have a limited duration and they persist when changing zones. However, they do not survive logging out and will have to be resummoned when coming back online. As the skill description indicates it, summoning a zombie requires a corpse which can belong to a dead monster or created by using a spell such as Desecrate. The level of the corpse, the map where it was created or the monster it belonged to have absolutely no influence on the resulting zombie. Its stats depend strictly on the gem level as well as the support gems and other buffs. By default, the zombies use a standard attack and an area of effect slam, both dealing physical damage. As such, most support gems that affect attacks, physical damage or area of effect can be used to support the zombie gem and in turn the summon minions themselves. For example, when using Ruthless support gem, every third attack of each zombie will be a Ruthless blow dealing more damage. Normally you are able to summon only 3 zombies, but through several passives, Necromancer Ascendancy and the Baron Helmet, we will increase that to 14. We then reduce that number to 7 zombies, but which will deal twice as much damage by using Montregrul's Grasp Scepter. This weapon also provides huge defense bonuses for the zombies, as well as causing any enemy skill by them to explode, dealing fire damage to other nearby monsters. That generally causes a huge chain reaction which will clear entire packs in a split second. As you can likely deduce from the Baron's description, in order to significantly increase the maximum number of zombies, you will need to stack a large amount of strength, at least 1200 to be more precise. This is a completely realistic number that's not too difficult to achieve while still maintaining very solid defenses and utility. The helmet also grants half of your strength to all minions, in turn boosting their HP and physical damage. Moreover, when you get 1000 strength, 2% of the damage dealt by the zombies is leached to you as life. This is an excellent defensive mechanism which will help you survive through a lot of incoming damage. You then capitalize on that strength to obtain a huge amount of energy shield through items such as Joffrey's Sanctuary or Shaper's Touch gloves. All in all, you will end up with over 6000 HP and 5000 energy shield. In addition, you will make use of several other minions such as Spectres, Animated Guardian, Stone Golem and Holy Relic, which act as buff bots that will further increase the zombies' DPS as well as defenses. Finally, you top it all off with 2 or 3 auras, a pretty obvious choice for a build that revolves around minions. While it sounds like a lot to take in, don't worry, as always I will talk about all these in much greater details in the passives, gems and gearing sections respectively. And speaking of that, let's actually start with the passive tree and leveling. As briefly mentioned in the build overview, the main objectives are to increase the number of zombies and to gather as much strength as possible. A large part of that will come from the passive tree, especially through jewels, so getting enough sockets will be a priority. Starting off as a witch, in Act 1 you will immediately go for a few significant passives such as Grave Intentions and Lord of the Dead. This will boost both the max number of zombies as well as their damage. However, you will likely notice that at this stage in the game your zombies tend to die quite easily and you need to resummon them often. They also don't deal too much damage yet, and this will be the case up to around level 25. As such, I recommend you temporarily level using Freezing Pulse or Arc until then. You can have zombies and skeletons around as meat shields, but don't rely on them to do much yet. You can also use Summon Raging Spirit if you prefer having a summoner vibe from the very beginning. That being said, moving to Act 2, you will get some HP and resistances through Cruel Preparation and its adjacent nodes, while pathing towards the excellent Death Attunement minion wheel. This will grant you an additional zombie as well as boost their damage and life. This act also brings with it the Deal with the Bandits quest, and the decision here is quite simple: kill them all. The bonuses they would provide are entirely useless for summoners, so the 2 passive points are clearly the way to go. In Acts 3 and 4 you continue to buff the zombies by taking the notable passives Spiritual Command and Sacrifice, and stop by and grab Quick Recovery to get a bit of life and mana regen for yourself. Lastly, take Grave Pact Wheel to obtain yet another zombie along with more damage and some life leech to keep them running. At this point you should start feeling like the zombies are finally earning that salary which you don't pay them, as they are actually killing stuff and survive long enough. Going through Acts 5 and 6 you get the first 2 jewel sockets in which you can put Violent Dead. These are temporary and will help you while leveling, but they will be later replaced by jewels providing large amounts of strength. As encounters start to get a bit tougher, it's a perfect time to grab some more life and strength by speccing into Retribution, Discipline and Training, and Sanctity. In Act 7 you further boost your defenses with Devotion and Shaper notable passives. Afterwards grab an additional socket in which you should move a Violent Dead jewel. In its place drop an Efficient Training jewel which will convert all the intelligence from its radius into strength. At this point you should be more or less in full summoner mode and not dealing any direct damage yourself, so it is a good time to take Elemental Equilibrium Keystone. This is quite a straightforward passive. When you deal damage with a certain element, let's take for example fire, so when you deal fire damage to an enemy, Elemental Equilibrium will increase that monster's fire resistance by lowering their cold and lightning ones by a very large amount. So why is this useful? When you pair your zombies with Hatred Aura, they will deal additional cold damage on top of the default physical. If you then deal fire or lightning damage to enemies, Elemental Equilibrium will lower their cold resistance, greatly boosting the damage dealt by the zombies. Thankfully, minions themselves do not trigger Elemental Equilibrium in any way, so they won't mess things up with the cold damage that they deal. I will, however, talk a bit more about triggering Elemental Equilibrium in the gems and gearing sections respectively. In Act 8, grab yet another socket for an additional Efficient Training Jewel, a 30 strength passive, as well as the Written in Blood cluster for additional HP and energy shield. While going through Acts 9 and 10, you will take 2 more jewel sockets. In one of them, move the Violent Dead from the top of the tree and replace it with a third and final Efficient Training Jewel. In the other free socket, use a Bronze Jewel with as much increased strength and dex as possible and a low decreased intelligence roll. As you finish the campaign, get Constitution and Purity of Flesh Wheel for a significant amount of HP to help you survive the initial maps. By around level 80, continue to pile up strength and additional life with Board to Fight and Heart of the Warrior. As you approach level 90, you should get the last socket for a final Bronze Jewel. From this point on, you have several options depending on what you feel like you're lacking: defenses, DPS, or more attributes such as Dex or Int. The recommended way is a balance of defenses and damage by picking up Barbarism, the Melding Wheel, and Righteous Army. I did, however, also include a full damage option in the Path of Building tool. And that's about it for the passive tree and leveling. In the next section, I'll be covering the Ascendancy class, which improves pretty much every single aspect of the build. Summoning that stuff to fight for you is clearly the signature of a Necromancer, so this is what we'll be picking up as the Ascendancy class. First points go to Invoker, a pretty simple but efficient passive. It buffs both damage and defenses of your minions and reduces the cooldown of Convocation. This skill is an excellent tool that you'll be using quite a lot both offensively and defensively, so being able to cast it more often is more than welcome. After completing Cruel Labyrinth, spend the points on the most important passive from the Necromancer Ascendancy, namely Flesh Binder. You get additional zombies with greatly improved slam attack and a decent amount of physical damage reduction for both yourself and the minions. The third passive is Commander of Darkness, an excellent way to get much more from your auras. The first bonus stacks for each aura you have active, and ideally you should end up with 3 of them. The other two bonuses will apply just once. However, apart from boosting the zombies' damage, they will help you cap both your and the minions' resistances. There are very few sources of minion resistances, so this is an excellent defensive buff for them. With the final Ascendancy points, grab Mistress of Sacrifice. This might be a bit surprising, but thanks to this you will be able to survive huge hits that would otherwise instantly kill you. This passive will apply half the effect of Spirit Offering to you as well, and in practice it will act like an instant energy shield heal. While I will go into greater details about it in the gem sections, for now I will just add that this is one of the most important defensive mechanisms of the build. With the Ascendancy out of the way, we can take a quick look at the Pantheon choices. Generally speaking, Pantheon choices are situational and there isn't a best pair that will outperform all others in any situation. However, there are certain options that complement specific builds quite well in a wide range of situations. For this particular case, here are my recommendations. For the Major God, Soul of Lunaris. Probably the best defensive Pantheon for builds which operate mostly in melee range. Since you'll be using Shield Charge to apply Elemental Equilibrium, you'll end up in the middle of the things quite often. For the Minor God, the optimal choice is Soul of Shakari. Chaos damage bypasses Energy Shield and poison in particular is encountered quite often while mapping, so it is always a good idea to reduce a type of damage that can ignore about half of your effective HP. Having covered the Pantheon choices, we can now focus on one of the most important aspects of any build: gems and links. As usual, I'll start off with the main skill, Raise Zombies and its support gems. First in line is a very simple and obvious choice, minion damage support adding a huge amount of damage without any downside. The second support is melee physical damage, yet another clear-cut DPS boost. By default, zombies deal only physical damage, so this gem will have excellent effectiveness. Third in line is a mix of damage and utility, namely minion speed support. While there are better damage gems on paper, zombies have to actually get in melee range to hit anything. In practice, every second they spend traveling between targets is a second they are not dealing damage. This gem will greatly minimize this downtime and significantly boost your clearing speed. Now technically the best third support gem would be an Empower at level 4, which can only be obtained through corruption. This would increase the level of your Raise Zombies gem by 3, granting them additional damage and HP. However, the price for a level 4 Empower is generally in the 5 to 6 Exalts range, so it should be an option only if you already have excellent gear that cannot really be further improved. The next support gem is Ruthless, which will transform your zombies every third hit into a Ruthless Blow, dealing vastly more physical damage than normal. Finally, for the last gem, there are a few options available depending on your preferences. The best all-rounder is Maim, which further increases physical damage and has a chance to apply the Maim debuff, slowing the enemies and causing them to take even more physical damage. An alternative is Multi-Strike, which will repeat every attack 2 additional times in quick succession. Technically this would be the best DPS option, but the extra attacks are generally wasted on trash mobs as they die in one hit anyway. It is however an excellent support gem for bosses as they're almost all guaranteed to hit. The next gem setup brings 3 additional minions whose sole purpose is to buff the zombies and yourself. This must be socketed in the helmet slot in order to get the +2 levels to minion gems bonus. First is the Animate Guardian, one of the most interesting minions in the game. It is summoned by using items drop on the ground, which the resulting minion will actually equip and use. As such, you will want to provide it gear that will grant bonuses to allies, meaning you and the other minions. I will go over the best items to be used by the Guardian in the gearing section. For now, I will mention that it can use weapon, shield, body armor, helmet, gloves and boots. However, be warned that if the Animated Guardian dies, all its gear is permanently lost. By leveling, only give it random rare items or cheap uniques that you don't need or would otherwise vendor. Later in the game, with enough minion defense and health passives, as well as leveling the gem itself, the Guardian will have over 50,000 HP and will survive pretty much anything. At that point, it's worth giving it more expensive and better items that will greatly buff the other minions. The second gem in this setup is Raise Spectre, another really cool minion which is summoned using the bodies of dead monsters. As the name indicates it, this minion is a ghost of that respective monster and, unlike zombies, it will inherit all the attributes and skills that the respective monster had while it was alive. As such, you will want 2 specific specters which have an ability that buffs the zombies, namely 2 Carnage Chieftains. These will periodically cast a spell which grants frenzy charges to all allies. In turn, these provide a great deal of damage and attack speed, excellent for both yourself and the rest of the minions. Apart from the skills, Spectres also inherit the level of the bodies which are used to summon them. For this particular build, this raises a small issue. Carnage Chieftains can only be found in Act 2 Old Fields map, which is a level 14 zone. This means that the resulting Spectres would also be level 14, making them completely useless later in the game. There is, however, a simple workaround using Desecrate skill. The corpses created this way will have either the same level as the map you're in or the level indicated in the skill's description, whichever of the two is smaller. If the map is level 50 but Desecrate can only raise corpses up to level 41, the outcome will obviously be level 41 corpses and afterwards Spectres. Similarly, if the map is level 41, it doesn't matter if Desecrate can create level 100 corpses, the result is still 41. The best option is to use a high level Desecrate gem while you're in the highest level map or zone that you have available. So this takes care of the corpses level problem, but what about the type of the monsters? How can you get high level Carnage Chieftain corpses if they only spawn in a level 14 map? Well, normally Desecrate will only create corpses of monsters which are native to the zone you're currently in, but once you've summoned the Spectre of a particular type, its corpse will be added to Desecrate's pool and it can be created on other maps as well. I know it sounds complicated, but after you've done it once, you'll see it's actually really simple. In fact, we interrupt this program to bring you a quick demonstration of summoning Carnage Chieftains. You start from Act 2 in the Forest Encampment and then go to the Old Fields zone. Remove Cast when Damage Taken gem so you can manually cast Desecrate. You can also use a separate higher level gem and cast it until you get a Carnage Chieftain corpse. You can highlight specific corpses by keeping the A key pressed on your keyboard. Once you found one, summon a Spectre from it and then go to the highest level area you can access. You can even use Delve for this if you went deep enough. Here you will need to use the highest level Desecrate gem you have and cast it until you spot a Carnage Chieftain corpse in the pile. Raise a Spectre from it and repeat the process to get the second one as well. Fortunately, you will very rarely have to go through this whole process. First of all, Spectres don't really die as they also have huge life pools and good defenses. They also persist when logging out, so in practice you only need to resummon them when you have access to higher level areas and you wish to upgrade the Spectres to the new level. Coming back to the gem setup, so far you have Animated Guardian and Raised Spectre. The third gem you'll add is Blood Magic. This allows Carnage Chieftains to spend a small amount of HP instead of mana to cast their Frenzy spell. This way they can really spam it, so it ends up having a permanent uptime. The last gem in this setup is Minion Life Support. Since these summons are not there to deal damage but only as sort of buff bots, you need to make sure that they survive. Next you have the movement skill setup, and for this build it will be Shield Charge. Apart from the obvious purpose of moving around faster, this is also used to proc Elemental Equilibrium by dealing a small amount of lightning damage and thus decreasing the monster's fire and cold resistances. In addition to that, it is also a way to tell your zombies what to attack. Normally they go about their business on their own, but if you attack a monster, they will immediately prioritize that target as well. You then link this gem to Fortify support, which will grant you the buff with the same name, providing 20% damage reduction from hits. Lastly, you will add faster attack support to make discharging significantly faster. You also make use of two Cast when Damage Taken setups. The first will be kept at level 1 and it will trigger Desecrate in order to create a bunch of corpses. The other link gem is Convocation, a spell which will summon all your minions around you and grant them a life regen buff. This is a great defensive mechanism as you essentially gain a zombie meat shield around you and they will also quickly kill whatever was hitting you, all while their life is being regenerated. The second Cast when Damage Taken setup is kept at level 2 such that it is triggered only after the first one. This is because the second gem is Spirit Offering, which will be using corpses raised by the Desecrate triggered by the other Cast when Damage Taken. Spirit Offering will grant a large chunk of energy shield to minions based on the number of corpses consumed. They will also get a whole bunch of resistances and a big added chaos damage buff. And since you took Mistress of Sacrifice passive from the Ascendancy, this will also apply to you at half effectiveness. Up next are the auras. First will be Hatred, which provides a large amount of cold damage to zombies based on their physical damage. This is then linked with Generosity support. The first obvious reason is that it further increases Hatred's damage bonus. The second one is that it prevents it from adding cold damage to your own attacks. As I mentioned earlier in the guide, you want to deal only lightning damage so that Elemental Equilibrium lowers the cold and fire resistances of the monsters you hit. If you had Hatred aura active on yourself, it will completely ruin this mechanism. Then in a completely separate link, socket Haste Aura, granting you and your minions increased attack and movement speed. In order to be able to keep both these auras active and have some leftover mana for shield charge, you need to link Haste with Enlighten support gem of at least level 2. Ideally, get a level 3 or 4 when you can afford that. The most important thing here is that you don't link the auras and their supports all together. You don't want generosity affecting haste, as you need that aura for yourself as well. I know it's tempting to have Enlighten also linked with hatred, but it's not worth losing the benefits from haste. There is also an alternative setup here by using an Elder Shield with socketed gems have 15% reduced mana reservation. In it you socket hatred linked with generosity and separately haste on its own. This will allow you to use an additional aura, namely War Banner, boosting your total DPS by about 10%. There are 3 other mandatory gems that do not need to be linked with anything and you can just squeeze them wherever you have any room left. First is Summon Stone Golem, which provides a large amount of life regen. Once you'll be using Joffrey's Sanctuary body armor, this bonus will turn into Energy Shield regen. Then you have Summon Holy Relic. This tiny minion will follow you around and will cast a Nova spell whenever you hit an enemy, granting life regeneration. This buff has increased effectiveness on other minions, helping them survive even more damage. The third one is Flame Dash. While some might consider this optional, the impact this has on map clearing speed is so large you cannot really drop this gem. The simple fact that it can be used to bypass obstacles and climb ledges is sufficient to earn its socket. Finally, if you have any free sockets left, add another high level convocation spell for manually recalling your zombies and making them follow you more easily. This is only a quality of life addition to the build and you can only use it if you have unset rings for the extra sockets. To wrap up this section, here's a compact list of gems you should aim to have at 20% quality. Gearing up for this build isn't too difficult and you can easily farm mid-tier maps with an investment of about 50 chaos. Of course you cannot reasonably expect to kill Uber Elder with that kind of gear, but the more currency you spend, the better it will perform. First, I need to point out that you do not care at all about any kind of affixes that add damage to yourself. Instead, you'll be looking only for the ones granting attributes, defenses and maybe some minion damage if you can afford it. The absolute number 1 priority is to gather at least 1200 strength to get the full benefit from the Baron helmet. This is the build's linchpin item and, as its description is saying, you are allowed to summon an additional zombie for every 300 strength you have. Half of your strength is also added to each minion, increasing their life and melee physical damage. Also, when reaching the 1000 strength mark, 2% of the zombie's damage will be leached to you as life. On top of that, it grants 2 levels to minion gems socketed in it, so here you will be placing the Animated Guardian and Spectres along with their supports. For the weapon slot, as hinted in the build overview, the best and only option here is the Montegrul's Grasp Scepter. While it halves the number of zombies, when well rolled it will also double their damage, so nothing really changes here. On top of that, it also gives them a huge amount of HP and resistances. Lastly, it causes enemies killed by zombies to explode and deal fire damage in a small area around them. This actually scales with all the minion damage modifiers, so in practice it will single-handedly clear entire packs after a single monster dies. One thing you need to keep in mind here is that the half number of zombies is always rounded down, so if normally you could summon 11 of them, when using this scepter you would only get 5. In the offhand, you will use a rare shield with as much strength, life, resistances and energy shield as possible. Attributes such as Dex or Int are more than welcome, as you will need a decent amount of each for your skills and auras. As mentioned in the gem section, there is also the option of using an Elder Shield, with socketed gems have 15% reduced mana reservation, so you can squeeze in another aura. The rest of the affixes remain the same: strength, life, resistances and other attributes. The body armor is the excellent Joffrey's Sanctuary. Apart from a solid amount of all resistances and life, it provides 2 energy shield for each 5 strength you have. And it just so happens that you are stacking about 1200 of those, so you end up with a huge amount of energy shield from this item alone. You also get Zealot Oath Keystone, which converts all life regen into energy shield regen. In practice, this will make it so you will very rarely drop all the way to HP, and when that happens, the zombie's leech will keep you alive. For the gloves, you'll go with yet another unique, the Shaper's Touch. They provide a somewhat similar benefit as the body armor, namely 2% increased maximum energy shield for each 10 strength. Basically more energy shield for no real additional investment. The optimal choice for boots is a pair of Alberon's Warpath for the insane amount of strength that it provides through its unique bonus of up to 18% increased strength. In practice, this translates to about 170 strength, way more than any other single item would normally have. They also come with a decent 20% movement speed and some chaos resistance, both more than welcome additions. Holding your invisible pants is a heavy belt with 70 plus strength and maximum life, resistances and energy shield. If you're able to get enough strength on other pieces of gear, then a Stygian Vice belt would be a much better option for its implicit, while the rest of affixes should be the same. The socket would allow you to use a ghastly eye jewel to provide some utility and damage for your minions. A very useful amulet that will help you get a large amount of strength as well as enough dex or int for all requirements is Astramentis. At first glance it might seem like a bit of a waste, but it can save you 2 or 3 affixes on the ring or the belt as well as some passive points, so in the end it will likely come on top. For the rings, the top priority is to get some flat lightning damage. This is absolutely necessary for triggering elemental equilibrium with shield charge. Also, make sure there is no other elemental damage on the rings. You can check the tooltip for shield charge and it should only show physical, lightning and perhaps some chaos damage. Apart from that, the other affixes should be strength, life, resistances and attributes. The best bases are unset rings, which will allow you to use the optional skills that I've mentioned in the gem section. These are much more valuable than any other implicit that other rings would bring. Up next are the jewels, which are a very important component of this build. First, you have 3 pieces of efficient training placed in the sockets located north, east and west of the witch starting area. Their positioning is really important as these jewels transform the intelligence from the passives you have actually taken into strength, so it's not enough for those passives to be just present in the jewels radius, they actually need to have points invested in them. This is completely different than the way other jewels normally work in respect to attribute points inside their radius. The 3 locations that I've indicated are the absolute optimal for this build in terms of strength, so don't place them anywhere else. The rest of the sockets in the passive tree should be filled with bronze jewels. Look for ones with 6% increased strength and dex and the lowest amount of reduced intelligence. Depending on how good your gear is and if you're already able to get 1200 strength, you can replace 1 or 2 bronze jewels with violent dead ones, greatly boosting the damage of your zombies. In case you can afford to drop yet another Brawn or you have a Stygian Vice belt, then use a Ghastly Eye with minions have a chance to blind on hit along with flat physical damage and attack speed. Moving on to the Flasks, there aren't unfortunately any minion specific ones for some strange reason, so you'll be using them mostly as utility and defensive tools for yourself. The first flask is a Sapping Eternal Life Flask of Staunching. Since you have such a low amount of unreserved mana, the Sapping prefix doesn't really have any downside while significantly increasing the amount of recovered life. Staunching suffix is a must-have in late game as bleeding can do a huge amount of damage and it is encountered quite often while mapping. Second one is an Experimenter Sulfur Flask of Warding. This is pretty much the only flask which provides some benefits to the minions through Consecrated Ground, mostly for the life regeneration. Up next is an ample Quicksilver Flask of Adrenaline to help you move around faster. Since your boots only have 20% movement speed, this flask will offset that downside to some extent. Then you should use a Chemist Basalt Flask of Heat for some additional physical damage reduction as well as freeze immunity. The last flask is up to personal preference. You can grab another Quicksilver so you won't run out of charges, or a silver one for a bit of movement and attack speed, helping you shield charge around faster. Now, as promised in the gem section, I will also briefly cover the best gear for your Animated Guardian. The cheap setup is made out of Leer Cast Helmet, Dying Breath Staff, Victorious Flight Boots, Maginord's Vice Gloves and any rare or cheap unique body armor that provides large amounts of life and resistances. For the optimal gear, replace the weapon with Kingmaker Axe and the body armor with Grafkul's Spelt. The helmet can be Mask of the Tribunal as a defensive option or a rare helmet with nearby enemies take 9% increased physical damage affix. While this bonus might seem lower than that of Leercast, it is in fact much more potent as it is applied after all the target's damage mitigations have taken place. These items are clearly more expensive, but with this gear your Animated Guardian will have around 50,000 HP and I haven't seen one die until now, so I feel like the investment is worth it. To wrap up gearing section, here are some excellent leveling uniques that will help you progress through the campaign. With the gearing out of the way, it is time to take a final look at the pros and cons of the build so you can better understand if it's what you are looking for. Starting off with the pros, a very tanky build between life and energy shield, you end up with over 10,000 effective HP. Add Fortify buff, Zombies life leech, the significant energy shield regen and the fact that you have an army of bodyguards around you and you obtain something really hard to kill. It is one of the most simple and easy to play summoner builds out there. Many players that would like to try out a minion build are generally taken aback by their complexity. With this build you can get to experience that playstyle without too much hassle. If anything, it's easier to play than most builds of any kind. An excellent hardcore build, especially when used with a defensive Animated Guardian. Most best in slot items for this build are actually really cheap as this type of gear is rather a niche one. For example, a ring with no damage is generally sold as junk and you can snag some really good deals with very little currency. You can do all the current game content including Uber Elder with a bit of minion micromanagement through Convocation. As for the cons, minion AI is not exactly brilliant. Sometimes they get stuck in very narrow corridors or corners or won't attack an enemy until you hit it as well. However, such issues are generally circumvented by using Convocation. Summoner playstyle, this is not everyone's cup of tea as it might seem a bit lazy or uninvolved. On the other hand, some people want exactly that, and since you've made it so far, I'll assume that you're one of them. The labyrinth feels quite awkward with all the minions covering traps and getting in the way. They make very quick work of Atziri himself, but getting there is sometimes a bit of a challenge. It is not able to run 2 map modes. More specifically, physical damage reflect will quickly kill your zombies and no mana regen will prevent you from using shield charge. You can power through these maps, but I strongly recommend to reroll or skip.
Learn anything new, Exile?
If you did, then you'll probably be happy to hear that there are more videos coming up in the near future with more exciting builds to try. Make sure not to miss them by subscribing to the channel so you get notified when that happens. And while you're at it, why not like this video as well or drop a comment down below to let me know your thoughts. Thank you all for watching and see you next time.